Hey, what's going on, guys? JMac here. So, the day that the patch notes were released for patch 2.2, I was going to put out a review video, but I figured it'd be more beneficial for you guys and myself if I went ahead and just played the patch for a few days and got a feel for the changes and how the Witch Doctor's faring in this patch so far. Now, before we get into it, keep in mind, this is the PTR, it was just released, and things are going to change. A lot of people are pretty upset with the Witch Doctor changes so far, and I don't blame them. I'm not terribly happy with them either, but you know, just keep in mind that there's going to be multiple builds of this PTR. This PTR will probably go on for a few months, and items are going to get introduced, items are going to get taken out, things are going to get buffed, and things are going to get nerfed. That's just kind of the nature of PTRs in general, and that's the point for us to go in and test them, and then let Blizzard know in a constructive manner what needs changed, what needs nerfed, what needs buffed. Alright, let's take a look at the Witch Doctor specific stuff first. So, they changed a couple abilities, nothing too crazy. My favorite change, though, is probably the change to Hex. So Hex used to just Hex one enemy at a time. Now it reads Summon a Fetish Shaman for 12 seconds that will Hex groups of enemies into chickens. And it's like a 12-yard radius, so if you position properly, you can actually Hex an entire group of elites or champions at once now. And it's really pretty good. It's good CC. It's kind of a nice alternative for something like Mass Confusion Paranoia on your bar, or even like Horrify in certain builds. So I like that quite a bit, and you know, if you run the Jinx rune, hexed enemies take additional 20% damage still, so you still get a damage buff out of it along with the crowd control. Really a pretty good ability, and I think it's a viable option now in a lot of setups. The other change is to Fetish Sycophants. When you hit enemies with your spells, you have up to a 15% chance to summon a dagger-wielding fetish. This is up from 10%. So it used to be 10%. Basically what they did is they reduced the proc coefficient of Reign of Toads. So I'm assuming they did that because they were upping the chance to summon a fetish with the passive, so it kind of evens out, but then other abilities now have a better chance of summoning fetishes, right? So, you know, if you're running Carnival with Dagger of Darts, you'll get fetishes out even quicker now than you would before. So overall, I don't really think Reign of Toads got nerfed too much as far as proccing fetishes, but it just kind of got brought in line with everything else. So other abilities are now viable, opposed to Reign of Toads being the only thing that you would ever run in tandem with the passive. So that brings us to my favorite new item they introduced, and that is the Cloth of Transcendence. Summon a Fetish Sycophant when you hit with a Mana Spender. That is when you hit with a Mana Spender. So before, we were relying on a proc coefficient from Reign of Toads to proc fetishes from the passive. This, as soon as anything that spends mana, anything that spends our resource, as soon as it hits an enemy, we get a fetish. So we're talking about getting 15 fetishes out extremely fast this way. And you know, the majority of the time in pet builds, you're running a one-hander anyway, so you're attacking really quickly. So it's really easy to get out 15 really fast. And you know, it's really good against single targets. You know, before, if you were spamming Reign of Toads on, say you're doing a 45+ Greater Rift, and all your pets just died to one of the hard bosses, getting fetishes back out from the passive is near impossible. You could barely do it. Now it's extremely easy. You'll have about 15 fetishes again in no time. And the other thing to keep in mind, the synergy of that with the Star Metal Kukri, because the reduction of cooldown of Fetish Army and Big Bad Voodoo by 1 second is each time a fetish deals damage. Not just Fetish Army, but any fetish. So after your pets have all died, getting fetishes back out quickly like this will then reduce the cooldown of your Fetish Army and your Big Bad Voodoo as well, and basically allow you to recover against a really hard Rift boss and still beat the Rift in time. So these pants are fantastic, by far my favorite addition, and honestly, like, having max pets out all the time gives you a huge damage buff. Even if it doesn't look like it on paper, it still does in general. So the other item they introduced is the Little Man's Finger. Gargantuan instead summons 3 smaller Gargantuans, each more powerful than before. Now, I've tested just about every Garg rune, and there's only 2 that are really viable so far in my opinion, and that's Wrathful Protector is by far the best, and then Restless Giant. Wrathful Protector does just a ton of damage. Now, it is a cooldown, whereas the rest of the Gargantuans are actual pets that will stay out until they die. This is a cooldown, so to use it to best effect, you have to have CDR in your build. But if you can have 90% to 100% uptime on this, it does a ton of damage. I had each Gargantuan, you know, there's 3 of them, each one even without a Mask of Jerem, critting for around 150 to 175 million apiece, and with Tasker and Theos attacking fast, it's pretty crazy damage. The biggest issue that I have with this ring in general is that it's a ring. There's so much competition in the ring slot. You know, there was already like Ring of Royal Grandeur and Unity and Stone of Jordan and stuff like that. In this patch, they added 4 to 5 new rings as well that are extremely good, including this one. So it's pretty tough to justify running this, but I think it is something that you could run up to 45 plus greater rifts, maybe capping out around 47-ish depending on the rift itself. But it is really, really good damage, and it definitely like feels like a legitimate zoo build, you know, especially if you run like a homunculus and the Wrathful Protectors and all your fetishes and stuff. It's pretty cool. It's a fun build to play, but the viability of it, I'm not quite sure. If it was, say, if this ability was on, say, bracers or a belt, I would have no problem dropping a Witching Hour or Augild's 3-piece to run this. Alright, that brings us to the revamped Zuni set. Now, they only added one new piece of Zuni, that's the Zuni gloves. So before we had 5 pieces: the feet, the head, the torso, the offhand, and the fingers. Or the finger, excuse me. Now we have the hands. So it's a little strange in general, mainly because, you know, these are obviously in direct rivalry with Tasker and Theos, and if we're gonna run 6-piece Zuni, there's one piece we're already never gonna run, right? And that's the head piece, because we're gonna either run a Ticklandian Visage, a Mask of Jerem, or a Carnival in a pet build. You know, voodoo masks are pretty much build defining for witch doctors. So at that point, we have zero room to decide which pieces we're gonna run. Because at that point we have to run a Ring of Royal Grandeur with the pox, and then obviously the gloves, the chest, the boots, and then the offhand. And to do that, you have to sacrifice, say you're running something like I have set up right here, like a Ticklandian sacrifice build. To run 6-piece Zuni, I would have to drop the homunculus, which means I couldn't run sacrifice for that damage. I'd have to drop any of the rings I wanted to run for a Ring of Royal Grandeur and a Zuni pox. I'd have to drop my Tasker and Theos for the gloves. And all of that just for the 6-piece bonus, that is, enemies hit by your mana spenders take 100% more damage from your pets for 4 seconds. It's just not worth it. There's no way it's worth it. You know, for one thing, just the ring slot in general, there's so many huge either toughness buffs or damage buffs from rings that being forced to run 2 specific rings like that don't really do anything for you but get you a bonus that's not even all that good is just unacceptable. I think if they at least added shoulders, I would be somewhat okay with that, because then it would be quite good in a Carnival setup. If they added shoulders, you could run shoulders, gloves, boots, chest, offhand, and then you'd still be able to run double Unity for greater rifts, but you're also getting a huge damage buff. So if they wanted to make the Zuni set specific to that build, I'd be somewhat alright with that, because for the most part it looks like pet builds in general are still going to be much better without running a 6-piece set like this. Normal pet builds, you know, where you're not shooting darts with a Carnival. Any other build with Ticklandian Visage or Mask of Jerem or something. So, you know, I think that this will be changed. I think they'll add another piece, or they'll mess around with the bonus itself to actually make it worthwhile, or something. They have to do something, really. I mean, like, every class in this patch is getting something amazing for their class, and they're getting extra builds for viability in Season 3 and in the patch, whereas at the moment, witch doctors are doing pretty good. Like, a dude did a 49 with some of these new items, but it wasn't with a set bonus. You know, it wasn't with the Zuni set. It was just with mainly just the new pants, and then the restraint and focus combo, which we'll go over in a minute, was really about it. So hopefully they change something with Zuni and get it in line with some of the other sets power-wise. Well, it just remains to be seen. But again, it is the PTR, and I think they are listening to our feedback, so we'll see what happens. Alright, that brings us to some of the new rings. So they revamped the focus and restraint. So now, when you get the 2-piece bonus, all of your damage is increased by up to 150% based on how much primary resource you have. And, you know, in pet builds, for the most part, we are using a mana spender now with Cloth of Transcendence, but honestly the best one to run from my testing so far is just the Poison Spirit Haunt rune, which is going to give 20% extra damage to all your pets, and it only costs 50 mana. 50 mana is pretty much nothing, really. So you can have basically 100% mana almost all the time as long as you manage your resources properly. So basically, what this is a better damage buff than a 6-piece set with just 2 rings. So I really don't get it. I don't really understand what Blizzard is thinking with that Zuni set in general. I mean, they made some of these other sets for other classes, and I'm sure I sound kind of jealous when I'm talking about these other sets, because honestly I am. Some of them are insane how much damage these classes are being able to do. You know, like I've seen some Tal Rasha's wizards, you know, hitting for like 2.5 billion with their meteors. And we're not even hitting that much with Soul Harvest and Jade, you know what I mean? So it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But again, like I said, one guy's done a 49 already. I think with an Ancient Star Metal Kukri, you could probably push up to 50, maybe a little bit higher, depending on if you get like a perfect Rift setup and stuff like that. But it's probably right around there right now, but it's definitely with this combination. I think just about every class right now is trying to fit this into their builds, because that's just so much damage, it's not even funny. So then the other items that are pretty crazy: the Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac. Reduce the remaining cooldown of one of your skills by 1 second each time you spend a resource. Now, first thing that's going to come to mind to any Witch Doctor is Jade Harvester. I mean, a lot of Witch Doctors were already running really high CDR and a Stone of Jordan and high Greater Rifts and not even running Unity anymore, and I think this will take that spot. This gives you way more uptime on Jaunt, and it'll give you you'll be soul harvesting way more often as well. And you can kind of like force the cooldown on specific abilities if you want to. You know, if just one of your abilities is on cooldown and you spend a resource, it's going to reduce the cooldown of that one ability because it's the only one that's on cooldown. Now obviously, you know, if you've Perinadoed and you Jaunted, it's Soul Harvest and Horrified, then it's going to pick one of those 4. And I believe it just picks it at random. So that's really good in there. It's also not bad in a Tall Man's Finger pet setup, which we're going to go over a couple pet setups here in just a minute that I've messed around with that I think are, at the moment at least, probably your best bet. So I like that quite a bit. So then you also have the Broken Promises Ring. After 5 consecutive non-critical hits, your chance to critically hit is increased to 100% for, I believe the range is either 2 or 3 seconds. So ideally you'd have a 3-second one. But again, you know, Haunt doesn't crit anymore. So all you have to do is cast Haunt 5 times and then you get this buff. So that's the other thing too with Jade. You know, Jade doesn't crit basically, but you get damage from crit chance. So if your crit chance is 100%, you're going to get a ridiculous amount of damage in Jade Harvester. And this is also really good for pet builds too. You could run this in a pet build and you know, cast Haunt 5 times and then have 100% crit chance for 3 seconds. So that's definitely an option. I don't think this is quite as powerful as how broken CDR can be, and more than likely this ring I feel like might get nerfed. I don't think it's necessarily broken for Jade Harvester or Witch Doctors in general, but I have a feeling it's going to end up being broken for other classes. It's pretty difficult for Blizzard to balance an item like this around every single class. You know, if this was a specific item to one class, it'd be much easier for them. But trying to bounce this around every class and every build in the game is pretty difficult overall. Let's take a look at a couple pet builds. So this is what I think is probably the best build overall. So we're running Haunt Poisoned Spirit. Haunted enemies take 20% more damage from all sources. This takes the spot of Reign of Toads. And honestly, Reign of Toads was only good for one thing, that was proccing fetishes. And Haunt is actually better at proccing fetishes. It's quicker now with the Cloth of Transcendence pants, and it gives your pets a damage buff. So that's a really nice addition to the build. Sacrifice Provoke the Pack, 20% increased damage per stack, and we're going to run a Homunculus to get dogs out to then sacrifice. Big Bad Voodoo Slam Dance, we're running an SMK to have this out all the time. Spirit Walk Jaunt. Horrify Face of Death with the Ticklandian Visage to basically perma-CC everything, or at least that's the idea. Keep everything crowd controlled while your pets deal damage, and keeps you and your pets alive. Fetish Army Legion of Daggers. Pierce the Veil. Spirit Vessel. Gruesome Feast. Now this 4th passive slot used to be Fetish Sycophants with Reign of Toads, but now that we don't need to run that with the new pants, I like Gruesome Feast quite a bit. We're going to run illusory boots, which means you're free to move around to pick up health globes. It's definitely the best option as far as damage. You could go other routes though, go more defensive for say Jungle Fortitude, Fierce Loyalty, Zombie Handler, something along those lines. So it's really up to you. I think Gruesome Feast is probably the best option though. As far as items, the Ticklandian Visage, 8 second ideally is what you want. You'd also rather have a socket than sacrifice damage here, but sacrifice damage isn't the worst. We're going to run natural 3-piece Augilds, so shoulders with Fetish Army, chest with Fetish Army, and then physical bracers. Just a physical crit chance, crit damage socket amulet. Got a Witching Hour here, the Cloth of Transcendence pants like we already talked about, illusory boots, homunculus. Now ideally you want a 4-second homunculus. That's probably one of the most important parts of it. You could probably run with a 5-second okay, but 4-second is really important. And then, you know, if you can get one that's ancient with crit chance and Fetish Army damage, that's the dream, but, you know, it's easier said than done. I've probably rolled like 30 of these on the PTR so far, and this is the best one that I got. And then the SMK, which is really pretty well rolled, but again, you definitely want an ancient one if you want to try to push up close to 50 with pets. And then the Focus and Restraint combination. As far as legendary gems go, you're more than likely you're going to run Bane of the Trapped is going to be your best, because everything's going to be horrified in place anyways, so Bane of the Trapped will do a ton of damage. Pain Enhancer is quite good, and then more than likely your third one's going to be Enforcer, although I have messed around with the Taeguk gem, because it's pretty easy to keep the stacks going since you're casting Haunt so often. But on the PTR, it's so laggy with pets that I decided to scrap it for now. But on live servers, that might end up being an option, and it gives you a lot of toughness as well. So that's what I think is the best build. And now I'm going to put out a couple of videos over the next couple of days with actual like in-depth guides of those builds and high-level Greater Rift gameplay and all that good stuff. But I think that's the best one. The other build that I've been messing around with is very similar. It plays just about the same way, but you just change the rings out. So you go Little Man's Finger here, and then the Obsidian Ring right here. So, and then as far as abilities go, all you really switch out is you get rid of Sacrifice, and you switch it to Gargantuan, Wrathful Protector, and then you switch Gruesome Feast to Midnight Feast to buff its damage. And the rest of the gear really is pretty much the same. I just end up swapping to Gargantuan Chest and Gargantuan Shoulders. And that's really about it. You could stay with Fetish Army shoulders and chest too if you wanted to, because you're still running Fetish Army. You know, I just liked buffing the Gargantuan damage to see how much damage he could do. I think you could run this setup up to around 46 or 47 probably, maybe a little bit higher with lucky riffs, but you're just, you know, you're losing out on so much damage not running this setup. It's crazy. This is going to end up giving you more damage than having out 3 Wrathful Protectors most of the time, if not all the time, depending on how much CDR you have. If you have somewhere around 30 to 35% CDR between the Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac and Grave Injustice, you should have pretty close to 100% uptime, if not 100% uptime on Wrathful Protector. It's dependent on how quickly you're killing things. So if you're doing a really high Greater Rift and things aren't dying as fast, you may not have as much uptime on Wrathful Protector. But around 35%-ish should be plenty. Now you could go more if you wanted to, but definitely the idea is to try to have out Wrathful Protector all the time if you can, to really make this build viable. One last item to talk about real quick is the Engiome Sword. Your skull cooldowns are reduced by 6 seconds. Now, people have been telling me this isn't working properly, so I have not tested it myself at all yet. But potentially, if it does end up making it into the game with an effect similar to this, it could have applications in Jade Harvester for sure. But it just kind of depends. Again, I haven't tested it myself, but I figured it was at least worth mentioning. So anyways, guys, there you go. There's my thoughts on the PTR so far. You know, let me know what you guys are thinking in the comments section below, and you know, hopefully we can get some constructive conversations going on, and hopefully Blizzard will listen to us and buff the Zuni Masa set so that I can make some videos on that, because honestly, unless it gets buffed, I'm not going to make any videos on it. It's that bad at the moment. So I plan to put out some build videos within the next few days, and I actually may even put out a couple wizard videos if you guys are interested in that too. So anyways, guys, as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe and all that good stuff. I'll see you guys next time.